Okay, so we are here for another episode of our Personhood podcast. I'm Gualberto Garcia Jones, and with me is Sarah Qualley, president of the Personhood Education arm. And today we're going to discuss the role of the judiciary in the pro-life movement and the pro-life strategy. And so I would like to start today with a tweet from our good friends at NARAL. And I'm going to read that. They say, "Thankfully, all of the extremist bans on abortion from this year have now been blocked from taking effect, and abortion is still legal in all 50 states. But, dun dun dun, SCOTUS's pending decision in June Medical Services versus Gee could still dismantle abortion rights." So the key there is that every single pro-life effort has been blocked by federal courts. And it isn't the appellate courts, it isn't the Supreme Court, it's federal district courts.
Right.
The lowest federal courts are basically blocking this entire movement of pro-life laws. And I promised you I would make you a little announcement here, something that I'm very proud of, and that is that NARAL has officially blocked the Personhood Twitter account. So I can no longer get their spin and disinformation, but I will be getting it from other sources just to stay on top of them. So there we go.
It's a badge of honor. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been working very hard at it, trying to actually tweet some truth out to them. In fact, I just want to mention real quick, the thing that I think got me banned is that they're attacking this state official in Missouri who has decided to investigate Planned Parenthood. And he requested records from the state on failed abortions. And basically they're trying to see how many children were killed after a failed abortion. And NARAL is twisting that to say that he's tracking women's periods.
Oh my.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they're really, scaring people with this. And so I just clarified that that's what they were actually trying to do, that they were getting records that were already in the state's possession. And they were trying to find out if infanticide had been committed by Planned Parenthood. But apparently that level of scrutiny is just too much for NARAL. So, I exposed that to their readers on Twitter and I got myself banned. So,
yeah, good on you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, getting to the topic of our discussion today.
Yes.
And this is very important because of our political activism and the promises that happen every election cycle of getting better judges. The pro-life movement has always really been focused on the legal strategy, aside from the Pregnancy Resource Center side, which is really non-political. The political and legal side really has dominated the pro-life movement, and so it's interesting to see the role of the judiciary and to discuss that a little more. So just for reference here, I'm going to lay out some of the different laws that have been enjoined, and I don't know where I put them, but I kind of know them by memory because it's the ones that everybody has been talking about this year. Obviously Ohio, Alabama, Kentucky, right. Louisiana, which other one? Mississippi, Georgia. These are all of our heartbeat bills, all of the pain, even the pain capable bills. Really, all of them have been blocked, as NARAL tells us, in all 50 states. And so, that really tells us something about the role, the grip of the judiciary on this subject. So I'll let you chime in here.
Yeah, and I think that we in the pro-life movement have been told for as long as I've been in the pro-life movement, and for many other people it's been longer, but we're often told that, well, this is part of the strategy. This is expected. We know that when we put forth laws, they will be challenged, and that's just par for the course along the way as we move up to the Supreme Court to challenge Roe. And I think we have to consider a couple things as part of that strategy, because I think we should always look at how effective our strategies are, and we should be measuring things just like a business does as it goes along to try to see whether what it's doing is matching its mission and whether it's achieving its mission. And so we have to look at, how good are these laws that are going forward into these courts and being enjoined. That's number one. And number two, what are the arguments for these laws that the pro-life side is making? And we can get into that a little bit later if we have time, particularly in the case of Alabama, where the Attorney General absolutely completely failed on the pro-life arguments in that case, that law that was just blocked. But I think it's really important for us to understand that if we are to accept that this is part of the pro-life strategy to end abortion, we need to know what that means. And I don't think that we do. I don't think we understand the degree of the issues with moving into the courts like this.
Right. And, Sarah, so much of our strategy in terms of crafting legislation is always affected by the comments that, well, if you are too pure, if you're too consistent, too strong in your pro-life argument, it's going to get tossed in court. Now, the reality is, as we can see here, everything is tossed in court. So on that note, I want to bring in something that happened just yesterday in Kansas. We have a great new affiliate there, Personhood Kansas. They've been working hard introducing this Personhood Amendment in Kansas for the last 10 years plus. And so they have a Personhood Amendment. In Kansas, they had a state Supreme Court decision, which basically mandated abortion as a state fundamental constitutional right under the state constitution, which is even broader than the than the right to abortion under Roe versus Wade under the federal constitution. So they specifically had a ruling by their activist courts. And you think of Kansas, you think of the heartland, but Kansas is the land of Kathleen Sebelius and some of the most hardcore pro-abortion people. So their Supreme Court is horrendous, and they passed. They basically legislated, because that's what they do. They legislated abortion into the Constitution. And so the legislators are trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? We've been supposedly chipping away at Roe for 40 years, not really getting anywhere, but chipping away. And now we can't even chip away because we have this fundamental right to abortion in the state constitution that does away with every possible regulation. And so our local affiliate there said, hello, we have the solution. It's a personhood amendment. It's a fundamental issue that you have to tackle anyways. And you already have that bill introduced, right? The other option, which is being pushed, is just an amendment that says that abortion is not a right that's in the Constitution. So just basically refuting the Supreme Court's judicial activism. Right. So you have this debate internally, and I would say, personhood is definitely the right way to go in this case, because the other option is just saying, it's kind of staying on the sidelines. It's saying, well, the babies can continue to be killed in Kansas, right? There's no right, no active positive right to abortion in the Constitution, and that's ignoring the truth, because there is. And so we prefer a more powerful approach, a more direct approach of actually clarifying the issue of personhood. That being said, the criticism that the Kansas Life Personhood Kansas group is receiving from other pro-life groups, from the National Right to Life affiliate group in Kansas, is to say, and I'm going to quote here, this is Jean Garden, Director of Government Relations of Kansas for Life, and she says, quote, "We're interested in making a difference and not just a statement." Okay, right. So she's saying personhood is just this pie in the sky. You're just going to feel good about how pure you are, and you're just going to make a statement. Okay, the Catholic Conference, they actually put it in a little bit more charitable way, but in the end, it's the same thing. And they said, Chuck Weber, their representative, said a personhood amendment just simply has no chance. We live in a real world, and it's not going to happen. So they're being told, it's not going to happen. It doesn't have a chance. But at the same time, we see that nothing has a chance, because right. Anytime you pass anything, the courts come in and stomp it out. Yeah. And so the question that I think I want to focus us on today is, what statement are we trying to make when we pass legislation? Because we have to face the truth. If we accept the judicial supremacy, the idea that the courts can come in and tell us how to live our lives, that they can legislate their social preferences into a constitution. If that's the case, then what kind of statement do we want to make? Do we want to make a weak statement like regulation proposals do? Or even ones that say that there's no right to abortion, but we shy away from actually making our case? Or if we're making a statement, we recognize that that's really what we're doing, then let's make a fundamental statement of personhood, that all human beings are persons. And in a way, it's also a question of faith, right? That we know as Christians that, the glories for God. We do what we can as the crooked pencils, and God's hand is the one that's going to guide this. So, of course, that's my opinion. What do you think about it?
Well, I think I agree. And I think that we have to remember that the reason that these activist state Supreme Courts are making these decisions is that they're hearing pro-life, quote unquote, restrictions that are coming to them. And the same thing happened in Iowa. So we are essentially, with our chipping away at Roe strategy, sort of handing this to the activist courts. So the idea of red states having blue courts in red states is a newer strategy, right? So they've come along over the years, and they've of course turned all the courts that are in their favor anyway, and they've relied on those for a long time. But now you have places like Kansas and Iowa that are important states, but they have these extremely activist courts where they just wait to bring these pro-life restrictions in so they can shoot them down and find a right to abortion in the Constitution. And that's exactly what happened.
Right.
And the only way that you can battle that is to make a statement of personhood, and is to fight that on a fundamental level. And until we start doing that, we're going to continue to chase our tail. It's 50 years now. You and I both know that we can look and we can measure the success of this incremental compromise and see that it's getting us into more and more trouble. And just like we saw in the Guttmacher analysis we did, we're painting ourselves in a corner. And even with the laws that we try to pass that are in the first trimester, right? These restrictions we're trying to move back now. Those are, again, still being enjoined. Right. So if we're going to make an effort, let's make a real effort and make a real difference.
Right. And, the argument that often is used against personhood amendments or, very consistent abortion bans is that it's going to set us back, that it's going to, do more harm than good. Here's an interesting fact for you and for the whole audience. I think you know this already, but, there are 10 states right now that have this judicially created right to a fundamental right to abortion, a broader right than is in Roe versus Wade, that would survive, a potential reversal of Roe versus Wade. In every single one of those 10 states, that right has been created after the Supreme Court of the state considered an abortion regulation that was fatally compromised. So, the states where there's nothing for pro-lifers to do got there by continuing to push compromised, immoral, really pro-life legislation. Yeah. And I think that should be a lesson to us. Now, that's not to say that those same courts wouldn't take a good, solid moral law and do the same thing. But at least, let's fight with all the tools that we have. Let's actually fight with the truth, which is the most important thing that we have on our side.
Well, if the law is a teacher, which we hear very often, then let's teach. Let's teach people that it's important to match our strategies with our fundamental belief system, right? If we say that every single human being is a unique member of the human family from fertilization onward, and then that unique person has rights that need to be protected equally under the law, then our laws must reflect that. And when they don't, we just continue to spin our wheels. We continue to just inch forward, fall back, inch forward, fall back, except what we find ourselves doing now is we're falling back further and further. Right. And there's less and less that we are able to do. and everything is being caught up in the court system. And the pro-life movement has to figure out a way to stop that.
Right. And I think, Sarah, that's where we could really, I think, move forward. If we were smart, we would see that this is fundamentally, it's not even something that's limited to the pro-life movement. The issue of judicial tyranny is a fundamental question of whether we live in a nation, in a republic that has government by the people and for the people, or do we live in a government that is governed by the judiciary, government by the judiciary? And I think right now, I think every legislator has to be asked that question, because whenever they support something that's good, they end up getting enjoined in the federal courts. And in my book, it's not okay. I'm sick and tired of them, getting elected, having a job, saying, we're going to do all these things. And then as soon as a little piddly district court judge that nobody knows says, you can't do it, they basically become a tyrant to the entire country. That's another thing for our listeners to know. They basically, and we've seen this with some of the immigration issues with the Trump administration, a federal district court judge, and there are thousands of them. I don't know. There are tons of these federal district court judges that almost nobody knows. One of these guys or gals can go ahead and enjoin a law or an executive action for the entire country. Right. So, they could be from the smallest federal district in South Dakota and enjoin the entire country. So this is a fundamental problem that we have to confront.
It is.
And we can find allies in this. We can find allies in the Second Amendment people. We can find allies in the rule of law and immigration policy people. So I think that would be a much more strategic thing to do than to throw up morally compromised pro-life legislation that's going to end up getting squashed. And then you just throw your hands up in the air and you have another fundraising campaign for your next law that's going to get squashed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think that so many people are feeling what you're just articulating now. They're just, most of them probably aren't lawyers like you are. And so we sort of look at this and go, well, okay, I don't know enough about this information and our situation right now in the movement, or even as a country, that to even speak to what's happening. But I know that something isn't right. I know that none of this seems like it should be the way it is. And I think that you've just hit on something that people really need to start to climb into. And I think the Personhood Alliance will continue to educate people on and apply to all of these different social and cultural issues that we deal with, in standing for life and marriage and family and all aspects of the person.
Marriage, I think, is a perfect way for people to really understand it, because we had, the country was still in favor of the idea that marriage is for one man and one woman as a foundation for a family.
Right.
We had state after state after state passing these state constitutional amendments, mobilizing people, having a public debate and protecting their constitutions. This definition, cultural definition, really a Christian definition of marriage. And this had been the law of the land for 250 years, for as long as this country has been around. And suddenly Justice Kennedy decides that, that's no longer the law of the land. And so, excuse my language, but to hell with the will of the people in every single state, in those 30 states where they did the hard work of amending their constitutions and clarifying their laws. That doesn't matter, because Justice Kennedy got out of bed one day and decided that, the right for whatever homosexual marriage is a fundamental right.
Right.
There's something seriously wrong, and we need to wake up to that, or else all of our efforts, legal efforts anyways, are really in vain.
No, I agree with that. And we're in this box and we're agreeing to keep ourselves there. And we shouldn't do that, right? We should really start standing up and looking around and asking really bold and important questions. And I think that's what this podcast is a start in, is saying, hey guys, there's a lot going on that maybe those of us on the ground that it's above our pay grade, right? We don't understand it. We'll just leave it to the attorneys. We'll leave it to the national movement to figure it out. Well, no, we can't do that anymore.
Right.
Because look at all of the damage that's being done. Look at all the money, all the time, all the human resources that are being thrown at this, and nothing is moving. And we're actually moving backwards. And again,
Right.
I'm going to bring up the Guttmacher report. I mean, there are trends happening in abortion right now, like the abortion pill, like self-managed abortions, that are not even being discussed.
Right.
And yet we're still up here kind of chipping away at the
Right.
edges of things. We're so far behind. And we
Right.
just have to just splash water on our face. That's the image I get, is like, okay, guys, wake up. Let's wake up now. What can we do? We're so far behind. How can we be proactive? How can we get out from underneath this very giant thumb in this country and be effective?
Right. And at some point we have to play some offense. Right?
Yeah.
We have stepped
Absolutely.
so far back now that we're talking about, the pro-life movement is focused on preventing infanticide. That's not even about abortion anymore.
Right.
And so we have to play some offense. I wanted to talk real quick about the judiciary in terms of the nomination process. There's somebody that you and I met at the Bring America Back to Life conference. She gave a talk there on her experience as a clerk for Justice Kavanaugh. She seemed like a very, I would say like a very middle of the road attorney. In my view, I think she's probably, doesn't have the kind of revolutionary spirit that we need right now, which, she's basically a good example of a solid pro-life conservative justice who wants to, obey the precedents and the rule of law. And so by the way, I'm done with that. I don't care about precedents if the precedent implies killing children. So,
that's right.
I'm never going to get nominated for a federal district court judgeship, but if I did, I would relish the moment in front of those senators to just tell them, I don't think the right to kill a child deserves presidential value.
Absolutely not.
And I would tell them that they're putting their immortal souls in jeopardy as well. But that being said, Sarah Pitlick had a hearing at the Senate Judiciary Committee just last month. And I just want to give you like a quick resume for this person, okay? Sarah Pitlick graduated summa cum laude from Boston College before receiving her master's degree in philosophy from Georgetown University in applied biomedical ethics from the Catholic University in Leuven in Belgium, where she was a Fulbright scholar. She then graduated from Yale Law School in 2008, where she founded the Yale Law Students for Life. She then worked for a major law firm in D.C. and then clerked for Brett Kavanaugh, who was an appeals court judge at the time and is now in the Supreme Court.
Right.
Then she went to work, and this was her great crime, she went to work for the Thomas More Society and defended pro-life sidewalk counselors, etc. Well, the ABA came out with a report that found her to be not qualified to be a district court judge. This is after we have jokers like Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court. This person who's a Fulbright scholar, and by the way, she's an active attorney who's also a mom of, I think, 4 children. And so, so much for empowering women and professional women. They really don't care about that if that woman happens to go against their liberal mantra. So she was found to be not qualified by the ABA. And the ABA is the legal establishment.
Right.
Another person just this week. See if I have his name here. Lawrence. He was actually applying for a higher job in an appeals court. He was made to cry, which I wouldn't recommend, by the way, when liberals attack you crying. Not the strongest way to combat them. But regardless, I don't know what was going through his mind. They made the man cry because they basically accused him of being a homophobe. And the ABA also found him to be not qualified based on his view on LGBTQ XYZ rights. Right. And so this is the ABA. I mean, the ABA is considered to be very, I mean, for lawyers who know, of course, all their policies are radical leftists, but they're the largest professional organization of lawyers. They're very well respected. And so, pro-lifers, even sort of centrist pro-lifers, and I don't know if this judge, Lawrence Van Dyke, is pro-life. I would imagine he is if the president's nominating him, but I don't know. But pro-lifers need not apply, basically. So even from the beginning, they're stacking these positions, and I think that leads us to what we saw in Alabama, where you were looking into, and I think we're going to link an article in the comments here that you're writing, detailing more of this, but how the pro-life states defend their pro-life laws once they get challenged.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this will be written in the article that people can read and share. But a lot of what's happening, I think, as we are being made to agree that this is the strategy of the pro-life movement, and yes, all of these laws are going to get challenged, and yes, they're going to get blocked, and that's good because we're going to take them up all the way to Roe, and they're going to challenge Roe. Again, I said at the beginning, it has to be a good law, and it also has to be a consistent foundational argument. But what just happened in Alabama, I think, is really shocking. You had the very widely known pro-life Attorney General of Alabama, Steve Marshall, argue this case that the abortion clinics had brought to a U.S. district court to say that, hey, we think we're going to win. We want a preliminary injunction. If this goes forward, there's no way that we won't lose because of Roe. And also, we just don't think there's any harm that's going to be done if we get this injunction versus the harm that's going to be done to women if this law is allowed to stand. And so what the Attorney General did, instead of arguing for the lives of preborn children, he essentially said that the abortion clinics were correct, that there is no right to life that can be found in the U.S. Constitution. And they were looking at the 5th and the 14th Amendments, right? And he agreed with the abortion clinics. And he also agreed that there was, I believe the quote was, equity in harm. So he was essentially arguing that, yeah, if the law is allowed to stand, there would be a lot of harm done. And that's actually, we need to consider that in terms of the harm the state would go through. So I know it's kind of tied up in legalese and people can read the article, but I wanted to point out a quote. We talked to Bill Fortenberry, who's the president of Personhood Alabama, our affiliate there. And I want to just pull out a quote that I think is so important that Bill said. And he notes that this was the perfect opportunity for Attorney General Marshall to bring up the fact that abortion is defined as murder under Alabama law, and that the children murdered by these clinics would suffer far more harm if the court agreed with the clinics. But Marshall said the clinics were right. He agreed with them that their clients would suffer more harm by being prevented from murdering their children than the children would suffer by being murdered. And this is incredible. It's incredible. And in defending his arguments, the Attorney General Marshall said, and I'm quoting, "As we have stated before, the state's objective is to advance our case to the U.S. Supreme Court." So the arguments for Alabama's abortion law, which is not a personhood law, we've written about this on our newsfeed as well, he's moving this forward saying, okay, you know what, on the back end, I'm arguing on behalf of the abortion clinics, but on the front end, he's saying, no, this is all part of our strategy. Remember, guys, this is what we're supposed to do. So I think this article being published with this insight from how this case is being argued is so important right now. It's important for us to know that the way these are being talked about, both in the cases and outside the cases, are so important for us to understand this idea of judicial tyranny in the pro-life movement right now.
Right. And it's even hard for me to understand. I'm looking forward to reading your article. But what argument is the Alabama Attorney General putting forward for life? Is he putting forward any argument? Why should an appellate court hear this case, or the district court, have them prevail in this case?
Now, I can't answer that because I'm not a legal scholar, but I can tell you that he is not arguing on the side of life. And I think when we consider the strategy that we've been stuck in, that we've been spinning our wheels in for the last 50 years, if we take his arguments and we put them in the context of this blindness that the movement has had and continues to have, then I think it starts to make sense. Because he's just operating in this bubble that we're stuck in, right? We're stuck in a strategy, and he's inside of that, and there's no way out of it. There's no way out. He cannot argue for the personhood of these children because it doesn't fit the agenda of this strategy. That's so important.
It reminds me a lot of the argument that was made by the U.S. Solicitor General before the U.S. Supreme Court when the government was defending the federal partial birth abortion law. And during those arguments, it's I made a little video for it, but I think it's within a minute, within the first minute, the Solicitor General, who was defending the partial birth abortion ban, so the putatively pro-life law, within that first minute, he says, hey, any woman who wants to have an abortion can still have an abortion. She still has recourse to her rights. She just, this law is just saying that they can't do it in this particular way. And I'm thinking, how is that even a pro-life argument? You're saying they can still, murder the innocent person. They just can't do it with a knife. They can do it with a gun, or vice versa. It doesn't make any sense. And so,
well, as long as we keep tiptoeing around Roe, this will happen. And that's exactly what we're doing. These ridiculously dangerous arguments against life by pro-life attorneys are shooting us in the foot. They're doing so much damage. We can see now that 7 states with, that had first trimester abortion restrictions passed in the last year have been enjoined. Again, expected, part of the strategy. But how are these being argued? How are these being argued?
And what is the cost of the legal victory, right?
Yes.
The cost of these legal victories is that the substance of your victory is null and void. There is no substance, because the only way you win is by admitting that you're not fighting for the right to life. You're just fighting for, some kind of a procedure to be followed before you kill the baby.
And how does that ever hit at the heart of Roe, which is personhood?
Right. And so you get back to that. And of course, we're not implying that if you go into court with a personhood argument that you're going to convince these tyrants. What we are arguing is that is the argument that needs to be made. And we have the parallel problem of judicial tyrants that are governing the country for us, and that we completely ignore, and we actually support when we craft our strategy based upon their illegitimate jurisdiction which they have taken upon themselves. So, I remember I was so disappointed when Senator Rubio, after the Obergefell decision, was asked about, what Kim Davis was doing and her resistance. And he said, well, the Supreme Court has spoken and it's now the law of the land. And I thought, come on, we have to have more guts than that. You know, if somebody came to your door, took your child, and, was getting ready to kill them, and they said, well, I have a court order, would you let them take your child, or would you, get your gun if you have one, or whatever else you had, and protect your child? And so I think we have been way too passive for way too long, and we have to really change our mindset and stop playing ball with these out of control courts.
Agreed.
And we have a couple episodes back, our discussion of sanctuary cities, which is our answer to this problem. And it is looking to the local people to govern themselves, to looking at how we can manage to build communities that can take care of these problems without having to delegate our problems away to people who are never really interested in helping us in the first place. And so I think we have a big challenge, but as we try to do here with your report on Guttmacher, I think with this look at judicial tyranny, we want to have an honest and straightforward approach, because it does us no good to peddle lies and to mislead people in their expectations. Yes, personhood is very tough. Yes, personhood is not going to convince a pro-abortion judge to magically do away with Roe versus Wade. But yes, personhood is at the heart of the matter. And if we don't tackle it ourselves, they're never going to tackle it for us.
Right. That's right. That's the central argument before us.
So, well, this interesting conversation. Anything else you want to touch on before we finish here with our podcast?
Just to remind people to look at some of the things that we've been mentioning, the Guttmacher report, of course, but the new article out on the Alabama Attorney General's arguments. I think that's really important to consider in light of what we've been talking about. And I know that we'll be writing more on this and doing some additional videos on it. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. And thank you, as always, to all our viewers. Make sure you share this. We're now on iTunes, the Apple Podcasts, the Google Podcasts, TuneIn. We also have a specific website that's dedicated to our podcast. So it's is it podcast.personhood.org?
That's it.
And you can get to it from our website, personhood.org, as well. So we've worked really hard to get you this information, and we really look forward to your comments and your feedback. And if you do have a topic that you'd want us to discuss, please send us an email, info@personhood.org, and we'd be happy to consider it and see if we can tackle it. So
sounds good.
Thank you very much. God bless you all, and we'll be talking to you soon.